lot of good talking to. My name is Lisa Schultz. I'm a professor here at the University of St. Thomas School of Law. I'm the co-director of the Murphy Institute for Catholic Thought, Law, and Public Policy. The Murphy Institute is a joint venture between the Center for Catholic Studies and the School of Law. And my co-director is a member of the faculty at the Department of Catholic Studies. He's in Rome right now, Billy Junker, but he sent his delegate, Don Briel, who's the director of the Center for Catholic Studies. On behalf of Catholic Studies and the Law School, I welcome you to our program. Our Hot Topics series explores a variety of issues that are of interest to Catholic thought, law, and public policy. And we do so in hour-long discussions that take on various shapes. Sometimes we have a number of explorations of different Catholic views of something. Sometimes we contrast Catholic and other faith perspectives views. And sometimes we have something that almost looks like a good old-fashioned debate. Today is one of those kind of times where we really are having a pro and a con on the question of, is legal abortion necessary for sexual equality in the United States? The format will be very debate-like, 15 minutes of comments by each side, 5 minutes of rebuttal responses, and then we'll open the floor to questions. We will take questions in the form of written questions that you should put on note cards. As the discussion progresses, we'll have a couple of people walking up and down the aisles, pass note cards to the side, and then we'll pose the questions to the speakers. To introduce our two speakers today, I'm happy to introduce one of our Murphy Fellows, a first-year law student, Christopher Damian.
In selecting speakers for this event, Erika Bachiochi was an obvious choice for an answer in the negative. Our question today is legal abortion necessary for sexual equality in the United States? Erika is a J.D. and a legal scholar on American constitutional law and feminist legal theory. In addition to writing and speaking about these issues, she is also a member of the Catholic Women's Forum of the Permanent Observer Mission of the Holy See to the UN. Her academic articles include Embodied Equality, Debunking Equal Protection Arguments for Abortion Rights, and Women, Sexual Asymmetry, and Catholic Teaching. In choosing a speaker in the affirmative, I could think of no better candidate than a professor I had known as an undergraduate at the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Gail Bederman is an associate professor of U.S. history. She specializes in gender studies, women's history, the history of sexuality, and interdisciplinary studies of sexuality and morality. I had known Dr. Bederman since I was a freshman, but I knew her mostly as the professor with whom I had profound disagreements on the most fundamental matters. One might note the irony that I first came to truly appreciate Dr. Bederman's contributions to abortion debates on campus when the current president of Notre Dame's Pro-Life Club, a good friend of mine, took Dr. Bederman's class on the history of sex and sexuality. I remember that friend coming to me after class one day when Dr. Bederman had congratulated her for pushing back against Dr. Bederman's views. Because of Dr. Bederman's willingness to engage in different viewpoints while being frank about her own views, my friend now recalls that course as among her favorites. Both of our speakers are here today because of their willingness to engage a very controversial issue in a frank, open, honest, and respectful manner. While they offer differing and opposing views, they should be admired for their willingness to allow these views to come into contact today. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
I'm Dr. Bederman, in case you didn't know which was which. I have to turn on my mic first and find a place for the water. All right, pretty soon you should be able to hear me. Can you hear me now? All right. I am Gail Bederman, not Erika. That is Erika. I have a handout there that go with my main points. So if you're interested in following along. I need to start with a few caveats. I am not a lawyer, and I cannot talk about law or legal reasoning. I mentioned this when I agreed to come, so don't ask me, I'm not a lawyer. Okay. Second, I'm not talking for the pro-choice movement. I am only talking for myself. In fact, I personally think that the argument from choice is problematic because very few people, except the very privileged in this country, have any real choice in their lives at all. And most of the women who get abortions are not so privileged. right? So I'm not speaking from choice. In fact, there's a certain way I'm countering choice. Finally, this is my first time speaking on this subject. Normally, I'm a historian, and nobody but Chris's friend wants to hear what I have to say about abortion. So I don't expect to convince anybody here to support legal abortion, but I am grateful for you all for coming, and I will be very grateful for your comments, questions, objections, suggestions, and feedbacks, because this is a maiden effort in a certain way. Okay, I start with two basic premises, which are connected to religious principles and are shaped by my study of Catholic social teaching, which I realize cannot be made to support legal abortion in any way. But I try to put feminism through. First, human brokenness exists and cannot be wished or argued away. In other words, my sense is it is not always possible to avoid terrible sin. Second, it is wrong and unconscionable to make the weakest people in society carry much heavier burdens than the rest of society is willing to carry. Those are my two premises. So let me go on to the talk. All right? First point. I'm defending the necessity for legal abortion in the United States today, not from the point of view of rights or choice, but from the recognition of human brokenness and a profound sense of our mutual responsibility to one another, especially to those who cannot care for themselves without help. That responsibility, as I see it, is based, as I see it, on a model of society which recognizes that, at least metaphorically, the basic unit of society is far more like an unhappily pregnant woman and her fetus than it is like an independent property-owning individual. I realize this is not the framework for law, but this is the framework that I'm coming at it from. We are all dependent on other people, much like the fetus is dependent on the mother. We all have other people who are profoundly dependent upon us, some of whom we know personally. Do we need to punch chairs, or is it, we're happy to, okay, we're really happy to have folks. All right. Okay, so this is in some ways my premise, right? We all have people dependent on us. Some of those people we know personally. Some of those people we do not know and we're only connected to through the polity as tax. In a certain way, if you look at society, we are all pregnant women, we are all the fetus. All right? There's a certain way in which what I'm arguing here is similar, but used in a profoundly different way than Peter Singer's discussion of the drowning child. All right? We're all responsible for the children we see drowning, and we know that intuitively, but we are also responsible for the people who are drowning or dying that we cannot care for, but we never meet, but we can do something about. My corollary to that is that we are equally responsible for the drowning mothers, whether seen or unseen. Okay, so that's my first point. That's my framework. Second, I'm arguing not from an abstract model, but from an embodied one, and specifically focusing on the real women who get real pregnancies and real babies and either give birth or obtain real abortions. Now, in the United States, who are those women? They are disproportionately poor. They are disproportionately non-white, especially black. They are disproportionately unmarried. And they are majority already mothers. I have some statistics down on the handout just to prove this. I'm not going to go over the statistics. This is probably familiar to many of you. Of people who are getting abortions, only 40% have never before given birth. Hence my rejection of the idea of choice. What kind of choice are we talking about in reality here? All right? So the women who get abortions in the United States are among the poorest. They're frequently mothers. They're raising children under heroic and very difficult circumstances. Circumstances that many of us, it's hard to connect with if you don't know people who are going through it. All right? Just to give you an idea, okay, right now these women often have what you might call a Sophie's choice between having an abortion and finding themselves and their children in very difficult situations. Just the kind of choices people come up with, and this should be familiar to many people. Every day, poor women face these impossible choices. Do we get heat or do we pay the rent? Do we buy the food or do we get the medicine that isn't covered by Medicaid because it's over the counter? Do we go to work and leave our kid at home because she's sick? Or do we get the car fixed and not so we can get to work and not be able to pay for food or medicine in certain ways? This is the reality for a whole lot of people, a whole lot of people. Social services and resources for poor women and their children in this country are minimal and shrinking. And I have to say, I think not one of us here would voluntarily live in that kind of economic, sometimes psychological desperation. This despite the fact that many of us here have already benefited from all kinds of privileges and social investments that many mothers and children will never get. All right? Again, we're talking human brokenness, human brokenness. If the basic model of society is the unhappily pregnant woman and her fetus, we are all the fetus, we are all the mother, we are all responsible, right? Then our fellow citizens are profoundly dependent on us, and we are not coming through for them, either individually or as a polity. So, if we are not willing to live in that kind of desperation ourselves, and we are not willing to adopt these women as our children, to give them as our sisters, as our children, to give them what they and their own children need to flourish as we would want our own sisters and our own children to do, can we legitimately demand they carry their children to term? Going to my third point. The answer here is usually adoption. Again, in a world and I'm all for adoption if a woman wishes this. But there are problems here that I often think are not recognized. So let's talk about adoption in a world populated not by abstractions but by flesh and blood human beings. Adoption itself cannot be the answer to this problem. This is because human women are not incubators, but they are women with flesh and blood and emotions who bond with their children through pregnancy. All right? Economically coerced adoption cannot be the answer because it treats mothers instrumentally, ignoring the profound and real ways in which women who carry children to term bond with their children. Every study that I know suggests that after 9 months of carrying their babies in their wombs, mothers bond with their children so profoundly. I mean, talk about Catholic social teaching. Who is more one flesh? A mother and the child she's carried, or a husband and wife? And we certainly are not in favor of economically coerced divorce. If a mother is willing to carry her child to term and then give that child up for adoption, that is a sacrifice and generosity I can profoundly admire. But most mothers can't and don't do that. Most mothers who carry their children to term keep them. They keep them knowing the difficult situation they're going to be in. They keep them knowing the difficult situation they're putting their children in because they love them. Right? Another way to say this. Enforcing adoption as the only answer to women in these circumstances has insuperable problems precisely because it's modeled on the individual rights, property-owning individual model of society, right? It pits the mother's interests against the child's interests in a way that is both cruel and unnatural, emotionally violent. We ourselves need to step up and care for both mother and child. We need to make sure nobody is living under conditions that we would not tolerate for our own children and would not tolerate for our own sisters. And if we are not willing to do that, both individually and as a polity, I don't see how we can ask the women getting abortions to take on that burden themselves if we are not willing to take that on. Now, if this seems harsh to you, if you're pretty sure you in that situation would take on those responsibilities, I ask you to follow me through a thought experiment, which I think gives you some idea of what we're asking women in poverty to do if we make abortion unavailable. In the United States today, there are thousands of special needs kids in foster care waiting for adoptive parents. There are tens of thousands more in really dreadful foster care situations who need loving homes. These are kids, for all intents and purposes, who are precisely in the position of singers drowning children. They are drowning. And even if they won't die tomorrow, if you don't fish them out, they will not flourish, many of them. I'm not saying all, I'm saying a large proportion, right? Many will die early from violence or alcoholism or go to prison. They will not lead the kinds of lives you would want your children to live, and through no fault of their own, they will, many of them, grow up and abort their own children. If you take them into your home and love them as your own, your life will turn upside down and your family may well suffer in much the same condition as desperately poor women would if they have another child. Your other child or children will be exposed to things and influences that you have tried to protect them from. It's likely to put a major strain on your marriage or your relationship. Your income will no longer suffice, and you'll have to cut drastically back on the necessities. Your career success, the vision of yourself as succeeding in your career, will take a hit. It will take a backseat to the new responsibilities you will have to help your new children deal with the traumas they have suffered, the massive educational deficits, perhaps physical, mental, emotional disabilities. This is precisely the kind of burden you're demanding women in poverty to take on if you make abortion unavailable and you do not help them to flourish, them and their children to flourish in the way that they need. If they bear that child, they will rear that child. And typically they will face precisely the kinds of disruptions you would face if you took on this kind of burden, which I know many of you already are. I understand people are sitting here saying, I'm already doing that. You're right. I mean, I'm not saying that you don't, but this is a difficult situation. All right, to sum up my point then, legal abortion remains necessary in the United States today because as a polity, we refuse to recognize or act upon our overwhelming responsibility to the type of women who actually get most of the abortions in the United States and to these women's already born children. I see no justice in forcing a few American birth mothers to sacrifice themselves and their other children, perhaps, for the children so engendered, unless we are all willing to sacrifice for those children. And honestly, all of us should be willing to sacrifice our treasure and our time for these children, but that is not politically likely in an era when even food stamps are on the chopping block. Until the entire American society is willing to step up to the plate and say all of America's children, born and unborn, are the nation's collective responsibility, as are their mothers, who need to be given what they need to raise these children and to flourish. Until then, I think the choice remains between allowing abortion to remain legal and treating the least privileged and most desperate women instrumentally and shamefully. Neither choice is a happy one. But that's the choice I think we have to make as a society. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bederman. And thanks to the Murphy Institute for having us both, wherever Lisa went, and Sean. I have my mic on, right? Everyone can hear me. So in the 15 minutes I have, I want to make three sorts of arguments. First, in direct response to the question posed to Professor Bederman and myself, does sexual equality require legal abortion? It seems to me that this really is the question in the abortion debate today, so I want to tackle it at face value before responding to Professor Bederman's, I think, eloquent defense of her position. In doing so, I want to discuss Justice Ginsburg's approach to abortion rights as representative of the equality as autonomy approach, something I think both Professor Bederman and I have a little bit of trouble with. Second, I want to respond to another sort of feminist altogether, one who I think is a bit closer to Professor Bederman, the relational feminist, who is rightly critical of liberal feminism's idolatry of autonomy, but who still supports abortion rights. Third, I want to speak directly to Professor Bederman's even more nuanced pro-choice position and respond to the suggestion, which I think, even though she didn't articulate this exactly, which I think is what she's saying, that abortion is a necessary evil and so properly legal, at least until U.S. law and policy better supports mothers, especially single mothers in poverty. So an impossible task in 15 minutes. Now I think 14, so I better get started. So for pro-choice feminist legal advocates, the equality rationale for abortion rights has always been the choice rationale, far better than privacy in Roe versus Wade or liberty in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And while the court has never agreed, it has come close. Justice O'Connor flirted with equality reasoning in her opinion for a plurality of the court in Casey, and both Justices Blackmun and Stevens used explicit equality rationales in their Casey concurrence and dissent, respectively. Before joining the court 14 months after Casey was decided, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as a scholar and attorney, was perhaps the leading pro-choice feminist proponent articulating this equality rationale for abortion rights. The legal argument, of course, that you can probably discern is that abortion rights should be safeguarded under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution rather than the Due Process Clause as it is now. A decade and a half after her arrival on the court, Justice Ginsburg would finally make her view officially known in her stinging dissent in the 2007 partial birth abortion case Gonzalez v. Carhart, a quote that many of you who are studying law here probably have heard before. Quote, legal challenges to undue restrictions on abortion procedures do not seek to vindicate some generalized notion of privacy. Rather, they center on a woman's autonomy to determine her life's course and thus to enjoy equal citizenship stature. So I painstakingly sort of take on and respond to Justice Ginsburg's view in a 2011 article in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. So here's the real thumbnail sketch. The law demands the full equality of the sexes. The court in modern times has properly renounced historical views of women as dependent creatures incapable of rational decision-making, recognizing instead that women, like men, are self-governing, competent individuals. Preventing women from determining their life course and from shaping their own destinies most certainly denies them the freedom and equality so prized by democratic peoples and inscribed in our Constitution. But goals and aspirations, decisions and destinies are never formed by disembodied minds. Rather, embodied individuals, actual men and women, are the relevant goal and decision-making agents. The equality argument for abortion suggests that because the professional and personal lives of men need not be interrupted by an ill-timed pregnancy because, frankly, men can just walk away, equality requires that the professional and personal lives of women ought not be interrupted either. But for the law to treat women and men equally, and this is what current equal protection jurisprudence seems to get, which is why I think the court has been right to reject equality arguments for abortion rights. The law cannot ignore the biological reality that men and women's bodies differ significantly with regard to reproduction. After all, men's physiological design makes them reproductively autonomous by nature, that is, physically detached from a pregnancy that may result from sexual activity in which they engage. This reproductive autonomy or physical detachment from pregnancy, of course, enables irresponsible men to shirk the duties that come with siring offspring. Women are not so designed. The life-giving consequences of the potentially procreative sexual act confront women with immediacy and gravity, a vulnerability that callous men have exploited throughout human history. The legal availability of abortion has worked to detach men even further from the potentialities of sexuality, offering men the illusion that sex can finally be completely consequence-free. The trouble is, for women, sex that results in pregnancy is never consequence-free. Indeed, it is fraught with consequence. Women must act affirmatively and destructively if they are to imitate male reproductive autonomy. Abortion rights legal scholars argue that it is abortion's opponents who would, in a biologically determinist fashion, create legal doctrines from biological facts. Yet it is pro-choice advocates themselves who select a particular biological reality, detached male sexuality, to determine how sexual equality should look when it comes to reproduction. In agitating for abortion to achieve this male-like reproductive autonomy, pro-choice feminists are holding up male physiology as the human norm. Seeking to mimic the autonomous, child-abandoning male through abortion would seem rather contrary to feminist ideals. But Justice Ginsburg tells us what's at stake. Quote, women's ability to realize their full potential is intimately connected to their ability to control their reproductive lives through abortion. Women can reach their full potential, Justice Ginsburg intimates, only by imitating men. And this is the real problem with the equality as autonomy arguments for abortion rights. They depend upon a feminist philosophy that reduces sexual equality to sameness, unwittingly setting up the male experience and especially the male body as the norm. In a legitimate attempt to get beyond the traditionalist idea that women's reproductive capacities should be determinative of women's lives, these pro-choice feminist legal thinkers have jettisoned the significance of the body altogether. Acknowledging the biological reality that the human species gestates in the wombs of women need not necessitate the current social reality that women are the primary and too often sole caretakers of their children, or the social arrangements in which professional and public occupations are so hostile to parenting duties. Biological realities need not determine social arrangements, but in ignoring or denying biological realities, we make it far more likely that social arrangements will end up denigrating biological difference. And I think that it's a whole lot of what we see today. So now there's a whole nother class of pro-choice feminists who are likewise troubled by mainstream feminism's penchant for individual autonomy, and who by contrast, and much like Catholics, understand human beings to be persons embedded in relationships of interdependence. Of course, Professor Bederman, you articulated this quite well, I think. Indeed, for these relational or care feminists, motherhood tends to be something valued by most women, and even pregnancy is understood for what it is, a unique relationship of nurture and caretaking. So, in my view, in their somewhat perplexing support for abortion, these feminists have begun, in the legal literature at least, to refer to abortion as a parenting decision, in which women abort out of respect for the responsibilities of motherhood and the duties they have to their already born children, or in some instances, the duties they presumably feel toward a child who will likely be born with significant disabilities. Though I think it deeply troubling to think that a mother would ever regard it as her parental duty to end the life of her own child, I do think the language of parental duty is a good and helpful advance for the cause of both women and the unborn, especially up and against former descriptive language of parasite and conscription, which is the favorite of some notable autonomy feminists. But why, I want to ask, do you and I have duties toward our born children such that the broader community in the form of the state properly intervenes when we've egregiously abdicated them? Do our parental duties really arise out of consent, which is the presumption in these scholars' arguments? Ironic, since these are some of the same scholars who criticize a contractual view of relationships. Or do these duties arise out of something else? Well, we need go no further than the common law to recognize that a special relationship, an affirmative duty of care, flows from parent to child. Why? Because of the vulnerability of the child and the dependence that child has upon her parent. The more vulnerable the child, the greater the parental duty. The unborn child is, of course, the most vulnerable and dependent of children. More, her mere existence as a dependent and vulnerable developing child is actually due to the life-giving act in which her parents engaged. Her parents are, as philosopher Frank Beckwith has written, quote, responsible for bringing into existence a being that is needy by nature and are thus responsible for its neediness, end quote. Thus, once we grant that an individual, unborn human being is biologically dependent upon her mother, which I think is a concession that follows directly once one concedes the humanity of the unborn, that child likewise deserves state protection from parental harm. Of course, this acknowledgement of the mother's duty to protect and nurture her unborn child may not lessen the hardship of bearing yet another child, or the first child, before one feels prepared. But shielding women from the reality of the biological dependency relationship her unborn child has with her, which I think is what we often see when, ultrasound, we don't want ultrasounds, required in the law, that type of thing, which is happening here in this state, I believe. It reeks of the worst sort of paternalism, and in the experiences of some women results in more debilitating emotional and physical harm in the future. But, and this is key, and this would be beginning my response here, the dependency relationship that an unborn child has with her pregnant mother does not translate into maternal duties alone, but necessarily implies paternal duties as well. For the pregnant woman surely did not bring about this vulnerable, dependent new human being solely by her own doing. And though her body is uniquely capable of gestating, developing human life, she does not carry sole responsibility for that life. And of course, parental duties, especially in the cases of paternal abandonment and maternal poverty, impose obligations on the rest of the community. Those obligations would be far more serious and far-reaching, or abortion more restricted. So now I arrive at Professor Bederman's position, which I take to be something like this. We are quite far off from the sort of social supports required for many poor women to bear and raise children. Thus, abortion should be permissible in the United States until U.S. policy and law better supports them. So with all due respect of Professor Bederman and the truly courageous challenge she has made of autonomy feminists, she gave a great lecture at Princeton a couple years ago, I believe, which really challenged them, I think legal abortion is exactly the wrong answer. And not only because in a just society, law must prioritize protection of the very weakest among us, the most vulnerable, the voiceless, but also from the perspective of women, and especially the women about whom both Professor Bederman and I are most concerned, poor single moms. It seems to me, and I think you agree, that we fail dreadfully as a society, and as feminists, if a solution we offer a poor pregnant woman is to help her rid herself of her child, for many such women, the hope that child represents is the best thing they've got going, even, and maybe this is a point of dispute, but especially when they've recognized that the best future for their child may be with an adoptive family. This is a great source of pride and resolution for many women enduring crisis pregnancies. It opens one up to the future when abortion just piles up regrets. Abortion is a cultural band-aid, a cultural cop-out, and a culturally corrosive cop-out at that. After all, abortion does nothing to change a disadvantaged woman's social situation. Abortion expects nothing different or new from men. Indeed, abortion leaves every societal, economic, and familial injustice just as it is. It is inequitable that becoming a parent should disproportionately impact mothers' well-being economically more than fathers. It is devastating that fathers can abdicate their parental duties with incommensurate financial and social repercussions, leaving many women to raise children alone in these deplorable conditions. But abortion does nothing to change these conditions. Rather, the remedy, which I hope maybe we can talk about, seems to me is to rectify this imbalance in parental responsibility. Call men to the table, right? And as well as the marketplace mentality that disfavors family obligation at all levels of society, but especially at the bottom in terms of socioeconomic demographics. Would that the energy pro-lifers and pro-choicers have spent fighting over abortion be dedicated instead to challenging wayward men to be fathers and employers to be more responsive to the demands of the family. The trouble is that the very existence of abortion as the now assumed solution to an ill-timed pregnancy has eliminated the incentive to make institutional change for the betterment of women and their children. Abortion has relieved a market-driven society from the costs associated with creating environments that welcome women and men who have children, which of course is the great majority of us. Even worse, it has created a powerful disincentive for men to become attached to and responsible for their children and the mothers of their children. Why? Well, a number of economists over the last decade and a half have demonstrated that liberal access to abortion has so lowered the cost of sex that it has radically transformed sexual norms in favor of male preferences for low commitment sex and away from higher commitment sex that research indicates is preferred by most women. Abortion, acting as sexual insurance, has ultimately decoupled sex from commitment and decoupled sex from parenting, at least as far as men are concerned. After all, with abortion available as a backup to contraceptive failure, misuse, or non-use, children are no longer an assumed or obvious part of the bargain. Thus, men have secured an even stronger rationale to simply ignore or reject pregnancies that result from low commitment sex. The now common mentality that sex has no consequences and thus entails no responsibilities often leaves women alone with their pregnancies to procure abortions or to rear their children on their own, both of which portend great and various harms in themselves, especially, of course, to disadvantaged women who hardly have the resources to go it alone, but so often opt to. 40 years after Roe, this is hardly an authentic advance for women. I want to end with a quote by Australian pro-life feminist Daphne Claire de Jong. Accepting the necessity of abortion is accepting that pregnant women and mothers are unable to function as persons in society. It indicates a willingness to adjust to the status quo, which is a betrayal of the feminist cause, a loss of the revolutionary vision. Thanks.
If people do have questions, if you want to put them on the outcards and start asking them through, like them while we're hearing the rebuttal.
What a pleasure to speak to debate someone with whom I agree so much. What a treat. Obviously, we have a lot of points of agreement here. I'm going to speak about 3 points in which I disagree with Erika's wonderful talk. And I think we're probably going to agree to disagree on some of these things, for sure. One thing, and this is probably going to be obvious. I don't necessarily see the responsibility of the mother to the absolutely dependent fetus as quite so different in kind as our mutual responsibility to other people who are equal, who are. I see that the point she's making. My sense is that that point lets us off the hook for being responsible to other people who are alive, right? So I see the difference that you're trying to say, but that sort of thing has allowed people to cut snap and be pro-life, is my personal sense. So we're just going to disagree on that one, I know. Number two, I completely agree on the question of father's responsibility. The problem is, and I don't know if people have read, there's a recent discussion from Brookings Institute, why it is that marriage rates have gone down so much among the poor. I don't know if you read that. It tracks entirely in terms of, if you take a look, marriage rates have gone down amongst all classes, but they've gone down much more in the classes for which it becomes less and less possible to earn a wage that will support a family. So if you take a look at poor people, like the bottom two-thirds, I have it here if anybody wants to look at it, the bottom two quartiles, men are simply not able to get the kinds of jobs that in the 1970s would allow them to support families. I mean, it's chutzpah to quote Pope Francis, but he says one of the two big issues at this point are absence of jobs for the young, and there we have it. We absolutely have it. People, I know a fair number of men who are paying child support. You can't get Medicaid if you don't name the father of the child, and the child does not pay child support. It basically gets taken out of people's non-existent wages. Men are being held financially responsible under law for most of the criteria, and they don't have the resources any more than the poor women have the resources often. This is, again, a real problem in society. So I don't know, you know the Edelin book about, there's a new one out about men.
Yeah.
So this perhaps is a way to talk about some of those issues. Yeah, no, it's a problem, but it's, again, a much bigger social problem, and if you're just going to put it on the fathers of the children, it's not going to get change because economically it's impossible. The final point that she's making is the economic point, the very interesting economic literature about how abortion allows people to lets men off the hook. I think that the literature, I mean, you said that better than I, but you know what I'm talking, you guys know what the point I'm talking about, right? All right. You can't get there from here. It's not Roe v. Wade that changed this. It's the first demographic transition from the beginning in the 1870s and 80s, which is when people in Western societies start using abortion and contraception to limit the size of their families. That's well before Planned Parenthood. It's well before. Once you get the idea that women should limit the size of their families because they can't afford to have the children, this goes way back there, these types of technologies become available, accessible, so forth and so on. If that train is out of the station, it's been gone 250, 100 and however many years at this point. The society is massively sexualized, and just shutting down on abortion and contraception gets us back to the point where women who were pregnant out of wedlock were shamed, where women were required to marry their rapists because they got pregnant, all kinds of issues. I just don't see us getting there from here. Does that make sense? I see your point. That's the wrong place to start. It's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. That's my sense. I think that's my 5 minutes.
Okay, you're really going to have to rope me in. 5 minutes? Who can talk for 5 minutes about any of this? Okay, so thank you. So let me start at the end. And I would say, I think it's a mistake. First of all, you're the historian here. But what I've seen is a great graph that shows that at the 1960s, right when the pill is thrown into basically, sort of massive use, we have a major takeoff, major precipitous. In fact, I can find it for you, where we had 5% out of wedlock childbearing up to 40%. And it was already happening. I mean, in the African American community, there was out of wedlock childbearing that was higher already than 5%, but 5% up to 40% from 1960. And so this is, I'll show you the graph after.
But you can't just draw one line and say that's the
Yeah, no, and
cause.
obviously we can't say that this is the absolute cause, but there is a demographic shift that I think is right on. When the pill becomes something that is the most effective means to prevent or reduce pregnancy, and what starts to happen? I mean, I think it's not so much ever saying, let's throw contraception out. No one, I don't think in their right mind, would ever want to make illegal contraception. There's no prelates out there who are saying that or anything like that. And obviously in the it's a moral issue, right? But obviously in the abortion debate too, we are so far away from making illegal abortion. Like, we have the most liberalized abortion. There's 4 more countries in the world who are a bit more liberal than we are. So we're really far, far beyond that. So I think coming to some, middle ground and saying, we should be able to, I think in this state, Teresa was telling me that you tried to have, a prohibition of abortion past 22 weeks, and the governor vetoed it. I mean, 22 weeks. This is in other countries, and all in Western Europe, abortion is restricted after 14 weeks. So there's certainly some major, middle ground that we could come to. But I think the other part of it is that what we've really allowed men off the hook, and that if you, to me, I look at the data, and I look at the Gottmark Institute has a great report about why women have abortions that is out, recently, and I look and see why aren't there people, bright people who are going into communities, hopefully people from those communities who've risen up and gone back, and really taking women by the hand, like people took me by the hand when I was, living a different kind of life, and saying, why are we giving men sex? Sorry, but what? And there's such a disconnect now because of abortion, because of potentially, because of contraception. That's arguable, we're not talking about that. But disconnect between sex and pregnancy and babies. And so because of that, and who's harmed by that? Men can just walk away. There's this, in the mainstream feminist movement, there's sort of this ignoring of the sense that, guess what? When women get pregnant, and this happens, why? Because contraception sometimes fails, because it's not used right, whatever it is, it's not used at all, whatever it is, that women get pregnant, and women are the ones who are then going on to make the decisions about single motherhood. And so my question is, let's back up a second and ask, why are, in the self-respect of sort of a feminist movement, aren't we saying men are totally being let off the hook? Now there's all these books about what men just hanging out playing video games, or men in the, in more demographically, the socioeconomic populations that are a lot poorer, whether it's drugs or gangs or whatever it is, because of the lack of jobs, of course. I mean, that's certainly one aspect, right? But it's also that, as women, I think feminists joining together and saying, let's stop, and just have that self-respect to say, no, because the consequences are disproportionately more burdensome on a woman when she gets pregnant. That no, that's what happens. Sex, that's how you get there. That's how you get there. So I would say that the other thing is just the messaging in the, especially I think communities, poorer communities, about adoption and about abortion and about out-of-wedlock childbearing is very interesting, and I think very sad. And I think that messaging has to somehow be changed. And I have a vision of a commercial where you have all of these people who are infertile. I mean, there are loads and loads of people waiting in line, for domestic adoption. And it's just, well, there are people, I think you can adopt African-American babies, but it's much harder. So everybody wants babies, and then there's all these abortions. And you think, wait, this is just this, and so just the, sort of heroic act, and it is a self-sacrificing act, there's no question, but just that it's something that's forward-looking, that gives a woman hope who is in a desperate circumstance, but that could have the hope of adoption. And I think, what you see in the messaging that they hear is that giving away a child is morally reprehensible. Having children out of wedlock indiscriminately is morally reprehensible. Abortion is the responsible act, and that's the messaging. And so it just seems like, when we're talking about, everybody kind of knows, I think a lot of people don't know, but we sort of know that there is a human being who exists, and that you're taking the life of that human being, that shouldn't be on par with having babies or giving away babies, offering babies to loving families, right? So, and again, I think we both agree that the real answer is, especially the Catholic community, it seems to me it's incumbent on us to look at how shout at those both political parties and say, the first message you need to have is how we can support the poor. And it doesn't mean it has to be the statism of Democrats, and Republicans don't even talk about it. How about talking about how maybe market solutions could care for the poor? And we just never hear it. So my 5 minutes are up.
I have a phenomenal set of questions here, and sorting through them is a task. And so I'm just going to speak as quickly as I can and see if we can get through as many as we possibly can. I'm going to begin with one challenge for Professor Bederman, and then another challenge for Mrs. Bachiochi. Okay. First, this question was posed to Gail Bederman. On the one hand, Professor, you have explained that the basis of your position is grounded upon a profound sense of one's mutual respect to another. On the other, the practical consequence derived from your thesis is an exacerbation of that precise brokenness and lack of mutual respect which you seek to remedy, namely the annihilation of one human being over another. Does not advocating an outcome of one life, mother, over one death, fetus, as being licit, create even more inequality and brokenness than that of one life is equal to one life?
Yes. But you can't get there from here. Because historically, what winds up happening historically is, I just want to get these ideas out there. I mean, yes, there's no question. The problem is that historically women bear the burdens. We're going to agree with this. And if we just pull back, I can see what's happening in policy. We just get more of the same. Does that make sense? Yes. It's the broken world. It's the world. It's the sin in the world. I don't know any way around it. I'm sorry. I can't have a better answer.
Yeah, I guess I would just say in response to that in my experience of my own sort of brokenness, which I had a lot of growing up in terms of divorce, a lot of divorce. My mother was married and divorced 3 times. That the way you get out of that, obviously, brokenness, there's no question, especially being here at a Catholic institution, do we have a crucifix somewhere? I mean, we're sort of aware that that's sort of the story is brokenness. We all experience it. And it seems to me the way out is face-to-face encounter. The Pope has been talking a lot about this. Face-to-face encounter. So how do I solve my brokenness? It's face-to-face encounter with someone who's vulnerable and needs me, right? Maybe, for some of us, it's out there with a poor woman in a crisis pregnancy, right? And I think
18 years thereafter.
And yeah, right. But I also solve some of my brokenness by that face-to-face encounter with one of my 6 children. Very difficult, very, very hard, right? We know that. Motherhood, fatherhood, very difficult. How do we solve that brokenness? It's always coming out of ourselves and through giving to the other. And I think that is, instead of that act that we put upon the woman of taking life, it's empowering her to come out of that brokenness and learn how to love in a sacrificial way, with us helping all over the place, because we have to be living poverty alongside, or it's never going to change. We can't, I think you're right on, that we can't expect others to be living their poverty, the ones who are in real economic turmoil, and us to be having our Starbucks coffee and getting a new iPhone all the time and not sacrificing. We have to be living major poverty of spirit if we're ever going to see any of this be resolved.
Okay, speaking of things that are broke, this is proposed to Erika. In thinking about the project, okay, so this is dealing with that broken world, for both of you, dealing with the broken world that we do live in. In thinking about the project of ending abortion and supporting poor women, how do we deal with the cultural political reality that those states most likely to forbid abortion, i.e. the most conservative, are also least likely to increase support for women? Why do we have that cultural political pattern in the U.S., and what can we do about it? Solve it for us.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that we're at this great time where Pope Francis is the one leading the charge and saying, hello out there, you in the Western, rich world, like get off your soapboxes and get out of your, sort of material consumption and live poverty. I mean, I think that really has to be it. And so for any aspiring, political figures out there, that somehow, whether your economics is more in a status mode, your economics is more in a market-based mode, argue about it, but have the most vulnerable when I hear Republicans talking about how the market works and making sure the market's free and blah, 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 so that we can create more wealth, like, for whom? Like, let's talk about who it is that most needs the serious assistance. And it just boggles the mind that we kind of continue on in this idea of just living abundance, and people. I mean, it's Charles Murray, the broken. I can't remember what the book is called, but just the two entirely different worlds of people in this country who have major wealth and people who have major. I mean, the income inequality gap is huge. So what do we do about that? For some of us, it's not going to be a status solution. It's going to be a market solution, or it's going to be civic institutions going out, churches, communities going out and helping the poor. But it's got to be something like that. It can't just be ignored and said, no, there's no income inequality, and keep the market unbridled. Like, Catholics can't think that way. We really can't. We have to come up with solutions. And if they want to be market-based, fine, then talk about it, but with the priority always of that presumption for the poor.
What she said.
That works.
Okay, challenge. It comes from a couple of different directions for both. One perspective, it seems that you both agree that men are at fault for everything. And that women have no responsibility for their actions. Please respond. And then another perspective on the same kind of questions, a theme of many of these questions. The cabbie who brought me here was from Nigeria, told me he has 4 kids and argued forcefully that men needed to be responsible to their kids. That's why he worked 2 jobs as a cabbie. Why can't American men do the same?
Have that person answer the first person's question.
There are various versions of that same question.
I think those are 2 questions, actually. The question of, am I beating up on men? Am I basically saying, everybody know what Bert Lahr said to his wife when she gave pregnant? You had him, you raise him. My sense is that first, I may be wrong, I apologize if I'm being unfair to the person who asked the first question. But traditionally what wound up happening is that women were responsible for these unhappy and unexpected pregnancies, particularly beginning in the 19th century. Actually, prior to that, women who had unexpected pregnancies, they were often respected in the community, they got married anyway, it wasn't a big deal. But by the 19th century, one of the best ways to shame women into not having children is by treating them as pariahs, basically, right? I don't think anybody wants to go back there. If this is not what the question was about, I'm sorry. That's the way I understood that question to read. I'm not willing to go back there. Does that make sense, at least as an answer? Why can't everybody? Why can't people have the 2 jobs and so forth and so on? Past the whole question of the existence of, I don't know how many people you know who have basically got a high school degree or not less than a high school degree and are going off and looking for work these days. In South Bend, they're not finding it very much, right? Even 1, let alone 2. So there's that issue. But the other issue is that my sense is that, okay, this is so not social science. This is Bederman-like speculation out there, right? But in any social situation, you got 10% of people who will succeed no matter what, 10% of the people who will fail no matter what, and the 80% in the middle who are struggling, and I'm one of the 80%, right? There's some people out there who can go off, they can succeed, they can get those 2 jobs, they can struggle, they have the support. A lot of us are just bozos, right? And that doesn't mean that they should struggle and suffer. That's all I'm trying to say. Does that make sense? It's not theological, but there you go.
So I definitely am calling upon women. I think I spent a long time yelling at women to exercise restraint in their sexual activity. I think that is a huge thing that women have to be doing. It's absolutely a responsibility for women. And men have to be doing it too, but often women sort of lead on that, right? I mean, I think it actually brings in the men better when you do that too, by the way. But, The other thing I would say is that there's really a new generation of men. My husband definitely falls in that camp. And I was telling, I think last night I mentioned it, and I also mentioned it to Gail earlier, that as a, sort of a radical feminist in college, I had this vision of a male who would be, equal help in child rearing, equally respectful for my profession. I mean, just really like a partnership. And where do I see that most? It's in my husband and in other Catholic fathers who are who are friends of mine, friends of my girlfriends. And that's where it is. It's in these Christian men. I'm sure there are other men out there as well. But the other thing I would say is that, nature burdens and gifts women with childbearing. It's just how it is. We get pregnant, and we have both the burden and the gift of that type of experience, which men do not have. So it seems to me that culture and society must burden and gift men with the responsibility of child rearing.
Okay, I hope I can get at least two more, one to each of you in. This is one for Gail. You hold up Peter Singer's model of the drowning child. Peter Singer also doesn't see a moral difference between abortion at any stage and infanticide of even a several-day-old child. How can we choose to allow abortion if the logical end of that philosophy is infanticide? Should poor mothers or mothers of severely disabled children, as Singer advocates, be allowed to terminate their child's life after birth?
No. I just go back to human brokenness. If we don't hold up, my sense is always, if we don't hold up the flourishing of the mother as much as the flourishing of the child, it will always go back to be the mother's burden. As a historian, I have seen this and seen this and seen this. I would be really happy. Personally, I'd be willing to give up, this is going on the web, all my friends will hate me for it, but let's make abortion illegal, but let all the children and all the mothers flourish. That's not going to happen. We're not going to get there from here if we just, does that make sense? Probably doesn't make sense. Basically, no, we're not allowed to kill. At a certain point, it makes a difference. I'm not an ethicist. I'm not a bioethicist. I understand what the person is saying, but I'm just not willing to throw the moms under the bus, and that's what always happens. So I'll throw the fetus under the bus. If we have to pit each other against each other, I'm throwing the fetus under the bus and leaving the mother not under the bus. So shoot me. That's where I'm coming from.
I would just respond by saying Peter Singer is a really great advocate for the pro-life cause, just by his very existence.
Then finally, this is one that goes really to the heart of, I think, of Erika's theory. And it's a question for Erika, and I think it's a part of was sort of Gail's argument. How do you respond to the fact that a woman who decides to go through abortion is, for the most part, not even aware of the equality, relational, and autonomy feminists and their abstract notions and theories?
Good point. Yeah, I think, how do I respond to that? Well, yeah, obviously we're in the academy right now, so this is what we talk about. In the real world, we love. I think we sacrifice and we love, and we sacrifice and we love, and then we get up the next day and we sacrifice and we love, and we figure out how it is that we, with our personal gifts and our personal situation out there in the world and the personal suffering that is in our community, we figure out how is it that I am called to sacrifice and to love. And I think, as academics, we need to be doing that too, and going out and trying to see where is it that I can be, really sacrificing, making it difficult for myself in the sense of, in our life as parents, it's, pretty much having all hand-me-down clothes. It's never going to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts unless there's like some really special occasion. It's trying to live poverty as much as we can. Why? So that we can have whatever extra we have, without, other than, raising our own children, to be able to find ways to help the poor and other, educational type of initiatives. I think we've got to have that on our conscience. And if we don't, especially as pro-lifers, then shame on us.
Well, thank you very much. An hour cannot do justice to the brilliance of both of these women. I want to thank you all for being here, and I want to thank both of them for participating in what is has been an extraordinary conversation, thoughtful conversation. As you know, if you want CLE credits that's been approved, there's the number for it. We hope to see you all back here on Friday, November 15th for our next program, Wall Street, the Financial Crisis and Prosecutorial Underreach, Two Views. In the meantime, please join me in thanking both of our speakers.